They mocked the two veterans for the old farmhouse they were rebuilding on the ridge above Ash Hollow, calling it Callahan's Folly. But one autumn afternoon, Reed Callahan's loyal dog, Chief, began to scratch at a patch of ground in the root cellar, refusing to leave it, as if he sensed something hidden deep within the earth. And when the ice storm the town never saw coming finally struck, the place they all laughed at became the only thing keeping the people of that valley alive. What did the dog uncover in the dark? And what did the men who had seen the world fall apart before know that no one else did? We invite you to like this video, comment with where you're watching from tonight, and stay with us until the very end for a story about how the quietest people are sometimes placed right where they need to be. The place itself was a testament to slow, patient work. It was an old homestead, built of stone and thick-hewn timber a century before, abandoned for 50 years until Reed Callahan and Ben Carter bought it and the surrounding acreage for next to nothing. Reed, at 47, moved with the quiet economy of a man who had spent 2 decades in the Navy SEALs, his hands sure as he remortared the stone foundation and replaced every single pane of glass in the old windows, caulking them against the mountain winds. Ben, his teammate from those same 2 decades, worked with him, but there was a tremor in his hands that never quite went away, a haunted look in his eyes that only seemed to settle when he was focused on a task Reed gave him. They had lost everything together, their careers, their sense of purpose, and the brothers who hadn't come home. Ash Hollow was supposed to be a place to forget, but Reed was building a place to remember how to survive. He had installed a heavy cast-iron wood stove in the main room, one that could heat the entire house and cook their meals, and its chimney was lined with fresh fire brick. He had spent a month clearing the old spring up the hill, replacing the cracked clay pipe with modern PVC, running a gravity-fed water line to a cistern in the cellar that held 500 gallons of clean, cold mountain water. There was no reliance on the county's electric pumps. Their light came from oil lamps, their warmth from the woods, and their water from the mountain itself. The cellar was their larder, stocked with shelves of canned goods, sacks of flour and rice, and dried beans, enough to last 2 men a full winter without ever seeing the town. Their companion in this quiet life was Chief, a German shepherd with more miles on him than most men, his muzzle gone gray, but his eyes still sharp. He was Reed's shadow, a silent partner in every chore, carrying small pieces of wood in his mouth or simply lying near the door, a watchful, breathing guardian. The dog was disciplined, never barking without cause, never moving without purpose. On a small, dusty table beside Reed's cot sat the one thing that seemed out of place, a worn photograph of a smiling woman and a young girl, their faces bright in the sun. He never spoke of them, and Ben never asked. It was just there, a quiet testament to a life before this one, a reason buried deeper than any root cellar. The town of Ash Hollow watched them with a mixture of pity and amusement. It was a place that had been shrinking for generations, the coal seams thinning out and the young people leaving for cities with more promise than boarded-up storefronts and a single blinking traffic light. The heart of the town's social life, if you could call it that, was Egan's Tavern, run by a man named Dale Egan. Dale was 50, with a flushed face and a voice that carried, a man who had stayed behind and grown bitter as his own dreams soured. He was the one who nicknamed their place Callahan's Folly. "Heard those 2 SEALs are building an ark up there on the ridge," he'd announced to the half-dozen regulars nursing their beers. "Waiting for the great flood to wash away the rest of us sinners." Laughter would ripple through the smoky room. The men who laughed along were men like him, men who felt trapped by the valley and resented anyone who seemed to be preparing for something they couldn't see. When Reed and Ben came down for supplies once a month in their old pickup truck, the mockery was quieter but just as sharp. They'd park in front of Jenkins's general store, and as they loaded sacks of feed and canisters of propane, they'd hear the whispers from the men loitering on the sidewalk. But there go the Doomsday Twins. Think they got their tinfoil hats on under those beanies? Reed never acknowledged it. He'd nod politely, his face calm and unreadable, and continue his work. Ben would keep his head down, his shoulders hunched, the laughter seeming to land on him like physical blows. The only person who treated them with simple, quiet decency was Sarah Jenkins, the widow who ran the store. She was a woman who had known loss. Her husband had died in a mine collapse a decade prior. She saw the steadiness in Reed's eyes and the pain in Ben's, and she treated them like any other customers. "Looks like you're getting ready for a long winter, Reed," she'd say, her voice gentle as she rang up their supplies. "Always better to have it and not need it," he would reply, his voice a low rumble, and she would just nod, a flicker of understanding in her gaze. Back in their truck, driving up the winding dirt road to the ridge, the silence between the two men would be thick. Ben would stare out at the passing trees, his hands clenched in his lap. Reed would just drive, his eyes on the road, absorbing the town's judgment like a stone wall absorbs the wind, letting it pass without leaving a mark. In the farmhouse, the old photograph of the woman and child seemed to watch him, a silent question in their faded smiles. The reason Reed prepared was etched into him by more than just his training. His service had taught him discipline, foresight, and how quickly the modern world's thin veneer of safety could be stripped away. He had seen cities with perfect power grids fall into darkness and chaos overnight. He knew that comfort was a privilege, not a right. But the true reason was colder and more personal. It was the memory of a blizzard in the Hindu Kush, a whiteout that had descended without warning, trapping his team on a mountainside. They had survived, but barely, and the memory of that biting, relentless cold, the kind that seeps into your bones and extinguishes the will to live, had never left him. He had lost men not to the enemy, but to the indifference of nature, and he had vowed never to be caught by it again. Ben carried his own ghosts from that same mountain and a dozen other places, and Reed's quiet preparation was a way of building a fortress not just against the weather, but against the chaos that lived inside his friend's head. One late afternoon, that preparation took a turn. Chief, who usually slept by the fire while they worked inside, became fixated on the far wall of the root cellar. It was an old section of stonework, rougher than the rest. The dog began to whine, a low, insistent sound, and pawed at the stones, his claws scraping against the rock. "What is it, boy?" Reed asked, kneeling beside him. Ben came over, watching, his brow furrowed. Chief ignored them, digging with a quiet intensity that was completely out of character. He was a dog trained for patience, for stillness. This was different. This was a signal. Trusting the animal's instincts more than his own reason, Reed took a crowbar and worked it into a crack between the stones. They were loose. Behind them was not earth, but a hollow space. He and Ben worked for an hour, pulling away the stones to reveal a small, dark opening. Inside was a hidden chamber, no bigger than a closet, and in its center was a small, hand-cranked well pump set into a stone-lined cistern, and on a wooden crate beside it, a leather-bound journal. The ink was faded, but the handwriting was clear. It was the journal of the original homesteader, dated 1977. Reed read the last entry aloud, his voice low in the lamplit cellar. "The great freeze has broken. The Lord has seen us through. The county line was cut off for 3 weeks. No power, no road clear. Many in the valley did not make it. This spring, hidden from the wind and the freeze, gave us our water. This cellar gave us our food. I pray no one ever sees a winter like this again. But if they do, may they find this place and know that a man can endure if he is prepared." Ben stared at the hidden spring, then at Reed, a flicker of something like hope in his tired eyes, They hadn't just been building a shelter. They had been uncovering a legacy of survival. The signs began in late October, subtle at first. Whispers of a change that only someone who lived by the land would notice. Reed saw it in the frantic industry of the squirrels, who stripped the oak trees bare with a desperate haste, their cheeks bulging with acorns. He saw it in the high-altitude geese, who flew south weeks earlier than usual, their formations tight and urgent against a sky that was a strange, bruised purple at dusk. The air itself felt different. The pressure would drop suddenly, making the old timbers of the house creak and groan, and the wind that came down from the northern ridges had a new kind of bite to it, a dry, sharp cold that promised more than just a passing frost. In town, the old-timers sitting on the bench outside Jenkins' general store would pull their collars tight and mutter about the coming winter. "Feels like 77, one of them would say, his voice a reedy whisper. But Dale Egan and the younger men would just laugh it off. "Every year you say it feels like 77, Earl. One of these days you might be right." Reed didn't need their confirmation. He trusted what he saw, what he felt, and what his gut, honed by years of reading hostile environments, was telling him. He and Ben intensified their work with a quiet, methodical urgency. They didn't just stack firewood. They built 3 massive, neatly organized ricks against the sheltered side of the house, enough to burn the stove hot for 2 months straight. They took the old homesteader's journal as a guide, clearing the intake for the hidden spring in the cellar, ensuring the hand pump worked smoothly, and filling the cistern to the brim. They double-checked the seals on every window and door, tacking heavy wool blankets over them as an extra layer of insulation. Reed made a final trip into town, his list longer than usual. He bought extra lamp oil, sacks of salt, medical supplies, and more bags of oats and dried milk than Sarah Jenkins had seen him buy all year. "You expecting a siege?" she asked, only half joking. "Just a long winter," Reed said, his eyes meeting hers for a moment. He saw a flicker of concern in her expression, a shared recognition of the signs. She didn't mock him. She simply added an extra box of matches to his order, on the house. Back on the ridge, Chief grew restless. The dog paced the perimeter of the house, his ears twitching, his nose to the wind. He rarely settled by the fire anymore, preferring to lie by the main door, a low growl rumbling in his chest whenever the wind howled in a particular key. He could feel it coming, too. The world was holding its breath, and Reed and Ben were the only ones listening. The disaster didn't arrive with the fury of a sudden blizzard. It crept in, deceptively gentle at first. A day of freezing rain began in the early hours of a Tuesday morning, a steady, relentless drizzle that was just below the freezing point. By dawn, every surface in Ash Hollow was coated in a perfect clear sheath of ice. Tree branches, heavy and glittering, began to sag. Power lines, normally humming with life, grew thick and silent, bearing a weight they were never designed to hold. The first one snapped around 8 a.m. with a sound like a rifle shot, followed by a shower of blue sparks that died in the rain. By noon, the entire valley was dark. The temperature continued to drop. The rain slowly turned to sleet, then to thick, heavy flakes of snow. The wind picked up, howling down the hollows, and what had been a beautiful, crystalline landscape turned into a nightmare. The ice-laden branches of ancient oaks and maples, unable to bend, began to break. The sound of cracking, splintering wood became a constant percussion, a drumbeat of destruction. Massive limbs and then entire trees crashed down onto roads, onto roofs, onto the remaining power poles. Ash Hollow was cut off from the world. Inside their farmhouse on the ridge, Reed and Ben moved with calm purpose. The wood stove radiated a steady, comforting heat. The oil lamps cast a warm, golden glow, pushing back the encroaching twilight. The wind shrieked against their reinforced walls, but inside, it was just a muffled roar. They could hear the trees falling nearby, the heavy, earth-shaking thuds, but their little stone and timber house stood firm, just as it had for 100 years. Down in the valley, panic was setting in. Houses that relied on electric heat pumps went cold within an hour. Those with propane tanks found them freezing over. Pipes in poorly insulated walls began to burst, flooding basements with icy water. The town's backup generator at the community hall sputtered and died after 6 hours, its fuel exhausted. People huddled in their homes, wrapped in every blanket they owned, watching the snow pile up against their windows, listening to the terrifying sounds of the forest tearing itself apart. The world they knew, the world of light switches and thermostats and running water, had vanished in less than a day. It had been replaced by a primal, killing cold. Dale Egan sat in his dark, freezing tavern, the bravado stripped from him, staring at his wife and 2 young children, their faces pale in the flickering candlelight. He had laughed at the 2 men on the ridge. Now, the thought of their warm, stocked house was a bitter pill, a symbol of a foresight he had arrogantly dismissed as paranoia. The first person to make it up the ridge was Sarah Jenkins. She didn't come for herself. She came for old Mrs. Gable, an 80-year-old woman who lived alone and whose small house had grown dangerously cold. Sarah had fought her way through the snow, a thermos of hot soup in her hands, only to find the old woman shivering and disoriented. Knowing she wouldn't survive the night there, Sarah had bundled her up and, with a strength born of desperation, half-carried her up the treacherous, snow-choked lane to Callahan's Folly. Reed opened the door before she could knock, Chief standing silently at his side. He had seen her lamp bobbing through the trees. He took in the scene at a glance. Sarah's exhausted face, Mrs. Gable's pale lips, and simply stepped back. "Bring her in," he said, his voice calm. "Yeah, Ben, get some blankets by the fire." They settled the old woman into a chair, and Ben, who had often seemed lost in his own world, moved with a newfound purpose, wrapping her gently and putting a warm mug of broth in her trembling hands. An hour later, 2 more figures appeared out of the swirling snow, a young couple, the Millers, with a baby bundled against the father's chest. Their roof had partially collapsed under the weight of a fallen oak limb. They were terrified, their faces etched with shock. Again, Reed opened the door and let them in without a word of judgment. By the next morning, word had somehow spread through the cold, desperate valley. They came in 1s and 2s, a slow, stumbling procession of the unprepared. They were Reed's mockers, the men from the tavern, their wives and children in tow. They came with their heads down, their pride frozen and shattered. The last to arrive was Dale Egan. He stood on the porch for a long moment, his family huddled behind him, the falling snow dusting his shoulders. When Reed opened the door, Dale couldn't meet his eyes. "Callahan," he mumbled, his voice thick. We've got nowhere else to go. The house is like an icebox." Reed just looked at him, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. Then he nodded toward the warm room behind him. "There's room by the fire," he said. Dale Egan finally looked up, his eyes filled with a shame so profound it was painful to witness. He herded his family inside, into the warmth and light of the house he had ridiculed for months. The place was crowded, filled with the hushed sounds of a dozen people, but it was safe. Chief moved among the newcomers, sniffing a child's outstretched hand, leaning his warm body against an old man's leg, a quiet, reassuring presence. The systems Reed had so patiently built were now humming with the task of keeping a community alive. For 3 more days, the storm raged. The wind never ceased its assault, and the snow piled into drifts that buried cars and rose to the eaves of houses. But inside Callahan's Folly, a strange and quiet miracle was taking place. The fortress built by two broken soldiers had become a sanctuary for the very people who had scorned it. A new routine, a new community, formed within its warm stone walls. Reed and Ben were the undisputed anchors. Reed managed the vital systems, the fire, the water, the rationing of supplies, with the same quiet authority he must have used on missions. Ben, seemingly pulled from his own darkness by the needs of others, organized the living space, tended to the elderly, and told stories to the children, his voice soft but steady. The people of Ash Hollow, stripped of their ordinary lives, found new roles. Dale Egan, the loudmouth tavern owner, spent hours outside with Reed, working a two-man crosscut saw to get through a fallen log, his face grim with effort, the sweat freezing on his brow. He chopped and split the wood, stacking it on the porch, his labor a silent, continuous apology. The Miller boy, who had been a listless teenager, discovered he had a knack for repairing things and worked with Ben to fix a broken lamp. The women, led by Sarah Jenkins, organized the kitchen, turning their pooled resources and Reed's supplies into hot, nourishing meals of stew and fresh bread baked on the wood stove. There were no arguments, no complaints. There was only the shared work of survival. On the third night, as the children slept and the adults sat quietly in the warm glow of the lamps, Dale Egan walked over to where Reed was checking the flue on the stove. "Callahan," he said, his voice low so only Reed could hear. "I was wrong about you, about all this." He gestured around the room at the people sleeping safely. "I was a fool. I'm sorry." Reed finished his task and turned to face him. He looked at Dale not with triumph, but with a simple, weary understanding. We're neighbors, Dale," he said. "That's all that matters now." He put a hand on the man's shoulder for a moment, a gesture of acceptance that was more powerful than any speech. In that moment, the mockery that had defined their relationship dissolved, replaced by a hard-won respect. The unwanted, ridiculed house on the ridge had become the heart of the valley, and its warmth was melting more than just the ice and snow. When the storm finally broke, the sun that rose over the valley revealed a world transformed. It was a landscape of profound silence and startling beauty, the ridges and hollows buried under a blanket of pure white, the ice-covered trees glittering like diamonds. But it was also a scene of devastation. The roads were impassable, the power lines were a tangled mess on the ground, and dozens of homes were damaged. It would be weeks before outside help could reach them. Yet, against all odds, Ash Hollow had survived. Every single person was accounted for, safe and alive, because of the shelter on the ridge. The experience changed the town forever. The shared hardship had forged a new kind of bond, a resilience born from dependency and cooperation. When the thaw came and people returned to their homes, they did not forget the lessons learned in Callahan's Folly. Led by a humbled and profoundly changed Dale Egan and the ever-practical Sarah Jenkins, the community began to prepare, not as individuals, but as a whole. They organized a town meeting, and this time, everyone listened when Reed Callahan spoke, his words few but weighted with experience. They started a community woodpile, ensuring the elderly would never be without heat. They helped each other reinforce their homes, insulate their pipes, and install wood stoves. They created a network, a plan for the next time the power went out, because they all knew there would be a next time. The town that had been slowly dying found a new reason to live: each other. Years passed. The scars on the landscape healed. Ash Hollow became known not for being a dying town, but for being a prepared one. Reed and Ben remained on the ridge, their quiet work continuing. Ben's ghosts seemed to have finally quieted, replaced by the purpose he found in helping his neighbors. Chief grew old, his muzzle completely white, his steps slow but still steady at Reed's side. One autumn, after a long and peaceful life, Reed passed away in his sleep. The entire town walked up the lane for his funeral, a silent procession of gratitude. They buried him on the hill overlooking the valley he had saved. They didn't build a fancy monument. Instead, Dale Egan himself carved a simple sign from a piece of oak and placed it at the bottom of the lane. It read, "Callahan Ridge," the strange choice of a man the town misunderstood, and the instincts of his loyal dog who found a hidden spring, had become the enduring legacy that saved them all, a quiet testament to the fact that the strongest shelters are built not just of stone and wood, but of foresight and care. It's a story that reminds us of a quiet, abiding truth. In a world that so often celebrates the loudest voice and the quickest success, the most important work is often done in silence, without an audience. It's the patient preparation, the steady fulfillment of a duty only you can see, the kindness offered when no one is watching. We are so often taught to look for saviors in the spotlight, but perhaps the real guardians are the quiet ones, the people the world overlooks or even laughs at. They are the ones placed in our lives, in our communities, for reasons we may not understand until the storm comes. They are the keepers of a deeper wisdom, a foresight born of hardship, a love expressed not in words, but in a stacked woodpile, a full pantry, and an open door. Who are the quiet preparers in your life, and what storm might they be getting you ready for? Thank you for joining us tonight. We hope you'll like and share this story if it touched your heart. Please let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love to see how far these stories travel. From all of us here, may you be blessed, and may you have the wisdom to see the strength in the quiet souls around you.